I'm going to go to Jay Sekulow from the ACLJ here in a second, and I want you to listen, especially if you're a Tea Party member, you're a 9/12 Project person. This is a serious situation going on with the IRS, and so serious that I want to play something from Willie Geist. He is a co-host on MSNBC. Listen to what he just said in a conversation with Joe Scarborough.
One other point to make, there's been many overblown claims of tyranny and abuse of power from the government over the last few years. Right. We've heard those when it comes to we're coming for your guns, that kind of thing. Sure. This is tyranny.
This is.
If this is the government, a nonpartisan agency coming after specific groups, this time it's real.
This time it's real. This is tyranny. Exactly what the president said to Ohio University students last week. Pay no attention to anyone who says there's tyranny in the government. That's MSNBC. Jay Sekulow has been a frequent guest on the program, and he has been a guy who has stood, and his organization, the ACLJ, stood for a long time on freedom issues and stood against government tyranny. He is one of the main guys taking this case on with the IRS. Jay, welcome to the program.
Hey, it's good to be with you, Glenn. Little known fact, my first job out of law school was as a trial lawyer for the Office of Chief Counsel, the Internal Revenue Service, and the tax-exempt group was under our jurisdiction. So,
holy cow! So you know it inside and out.
What's going on here, and it's more than troubling.
Okay, so tell me, you have 27 cases, and I know that one of them is not the National 912 group, because National, when they started to file income tax and wanted tax-exempt status, they got hassled like crazy, and they just said it's not worth it. And so it's really hurt them on fundraising, but they just did not want the hassle from the government. They knew they were being set up. So you have 27 cases now. Tell us exactly what happened and why it's so troubling.
Well, we got 27 cases. We were contacted early last year when the second round of questionnaires came from the Internal Revenue Service to these groups that were either 912 groups or Tea Party groups or conservative organizations. And they started asking for donor information, membership list, communications between members and members of the House and Senate or local legislative bodies and assemblies. And that's when we realized this has taken on a whole new dimension. So we simply and aggressively wrote back to the IRS. We started representing the groups and said, we're not giving you that information. You're not entitled to it. We gave them the list of cases why they're not entitled to it, going back to the 1950s, the NAACP cases. And ultimately, 15. But the questions were very aggressive, and we maintained a very aggressive response. 15 of the groups have been granted status exemption, but there are still 10 pending. And like you just mentioned, Glenn, we had 2 that just said it's not worth the hassle of waiting 2.5 years with these intrusive questions coming in from the government. So the reaction is understandable. People got frustrated, but this was a coordinated effort, and this attempt to lay to the feet of, quote, low-level employees. I used to work for that Office of Chief Counsel of the IRS. I was a lawyer there. The fact is, the tax-exempt group is what's called a specialty group. They are specially trained Internal Revenue Service agents, specially trained in tax-exempt orgs. These are not low-level bureaucrats. And now we know there were meetings as high up as the Chief Counsel's office, which is the highest legal office inside the IRS. So that's nonsense. And by the way, those are the Chief Counsel and the head of the IRS are both presidential appointments. So I can't say this is an independent agency.
So let me ask you this: read the Nixon impeachment clause here. This is, I think, the first charge.
This is Article 2, Section 1.
Article 2, okay.
Just skipping through it a little bit, but he has acting personally and through his subordinates and agents endeavored to obtain from the Internal Revenue Service, in violation of the constitutional rights of citizens, confidential information contained in income tax returns for purpose not authorized by law, and to cause, in violation of the constitutional rights of citizens, income tax audits or other income tax investigations to be initiated or conducted in a discriminatory manner.
Okay, that was against Nixon. Better, worse, or about the same?
No, this is worse because this isn't only tax information and selective prosecution. This was then going after the people that supported these organizations by requesting the donor list, something they're not even required to put in their tax return. In other words, the tax return itself, Glenn, for these nonprofits does not include a list of your donors. because they're not entitled to it. Yet the IRS asked for that. That's more than Nixon did by a long stretch. And that's where the real difficulty is. We've sent out a letter this afternoon or this morning to the IRS commissioner, the acting commissioner, Steve Miller, as well as the chief counsel, demanding that the remainder of our clients be granted their exemption immediately. And I will tell you this, we are drafting complaints against the federal government and the agents involved right now. That's in process today.
Jay, the other thing this administration is trying to do is hide behind the fact that Douglas Shulman, who was the commissioner of the IRS when this happened, was a Bush appointee.
Right.
Can they lay that at Bush's feet now? Or, I mean...
Of course not. And here's why. He was finishing up his appointed term, which I think he had 6 months left on it when he made that statement.
Mm-hmm.
They probably gave him incorrect information. Obviously they did. I don't think he was hiding the ball. I think he was based on the information he was told. Unfortunately, what was actually happening was his people within the IRS themselves were engaged in this, and the chief counsel is appointed by the president.
Mm-hmm.
So the chief counsel was an Obama appointee, and the tax-exempt head had previously worked with the FCC. So, I mean, you can't blame this on Bush. These letters are coming out in 2012.
Can he separate?
They can't do it.
Can he separate himself enough to say, "Oh boy, they were just out of control"?
They're out of control agency.
Well, here's the problem. You got Jay Carney saying it's an independent agency, which is factually not true and constitutionally not true. I mean, it's the IRS is the enforcement arm of Treasury. Treasury is an executive office function. So that's bogus. So that's what they're going to try to do. The question will be whether the American people buy it, and I suspect, even as you said, the mainstream media has picked this up, and they are running with it. They realize that this is not just a tempest in a teapot. This teapot is boiling over.
Okay. You said that you went back to the 50s to see this kind of abuse. I have said since we were together as a people at the feet of Abraham Lincoln, I said this is a civil rights movement, that it'll catch up to us, that we will begin to understand that the tactics used in the 50s and in the late 1800s, without the physical terror, except for the stuff that happened with the labor unions, those same kind of tactics are being used, and this is a civil rights movement now. Would you say that's accurate?
Well, I think it is, and the government, which unfortunately is going back to the same attempts they made to stifle the civil rights movement for African Americans, for Black Americans in the United States, led by Dr. King, they're using the same tactics. What did they ask the NAACP? Who's your members? Give us your mailing list. Who do you get money from? And the NAACP, led by a legal charge led by Thurgood Marshall, who did a brilliant job of taking cases all the way to the Supreme Court, establishing the government has no right to ask for that information. But it's like they don't learn. It did not work out very well for the government in the 1950s, especially these states that were trying to squash the civil rights movement, and it's not going to work out very well for the administration in 2013 either.
Okay, so, Jay, what needs to happen, and how can the average American help?
Well, I think there's going to be two things that need to happen immediately. Number one, the groups that are pending need to get the recognition because, as you said, they're getting worn out. That needs to happen, period. So that we can get in play, and we're demanding that. Number two, the people that that have done this need to be held accountable, and that'll take place in two forms. Congress will have extensive oversight hearings. These aren't just going to be photo opportunities. This is going to be the real deal, and I expect many of them. And then, as I said, we're looking at right now federal court action against the individual agents that were involved in this, and we'll see where that goes. So we're looking at that right now.
Jay, I appreciate it. I don't know if this would fall with you, but we were targeted, and nobody cared. We were targeted by the White House for smear campaigns and for boycotting of my business. And It was Van Jones, it was Jim Wallace, it was the labor unions, and they were all the people that were in the White House at the time that it was going on. Is there any connection at all to things like that, to this?
Well, I don't, there's another aspect to this, Glenn, and that is it's not just conservative Christian groups that have been targeted here. There's Jewish conservative groups that also have been targeted. So it makes sense, and they were targeted because their position on Israel was counter to what the administration's has been. And I think you could tie what happened to you, what's happening now, what's happening to these conservative Jewish groups. It's all the same.
It's
stifling dissent. And when you have the government trying to stifle dissent, that's really winning. It's bad enough when individuals do it, but it's a free country. Hey, I could disagree with you, you can disagree with me, but your government doesn't get to do that.
Most people have they're worn out from this, mainly from this media. That media, they just don't care. And so the media will pick something up, and then they'll dismiss it, and then they'll move on, and then you never hear about it again, and it just gets worse. 2 questions. One, if this isn't corrected, how dangerous is the IRS and this administration?
Unbelievably so, because if they can ask these groups for this kind of information, I shudder to think what they can ask of individuals on audits as well.
Especially with our health care.
If this goes unchecked, you've set the IRS into a version of the CIA aimed at the American people. I mean, the intrusiveness of it would be unprecedented.
And what do you expect to actually happen? Do you think
I
this
think heads are going to roll, Glenn. I mean,
serious heads or little heads?
That people are going to be held accountable. But the question is what the White House knew when they knew it, what the appointees, the political appointees knew. But the fact that the agents themselves thought they could do this and it was signed off on by group managers and probably chief counsel's office, that in and of itself raises a whole specter. And I don't know if we yet know where those consequences will be.
Jay, thank you so much. It's good to have you out there fighting.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
You know, you said
ACLJ, by the way, the American Center for Law and Justice.